¿Dónde estoy? Neredeyim? ¿Dónde estoy? Where am I? Hi, and welcome to the Lost Yogini podcast, a podcast about deep diving into people's spiritual journeys. And my name is McKay Blue. I am the host, and today we're joined by Sarah Tye of the Spirit Journey Collective. Hi, Sarah, and thank you for joining today.
Hi, McKay. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be a part of your podcast.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, I'd love to start by asking you a little bit about your background. If you could tell us a little bit about where you're from, a little bit about what you have going on, the projects you're working on, and that kind of information.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my name is Sarah Tye, as you mentioned, and I am the business owner for Spirit Journey Collective and the podcast host for the same name, Spirit Journey Collective. But what do I actually do? I am a tarot reader. And so I know that comes with a lot of stigma, and lots of people go different places with that. So, what I do is not fortune telling. What most people think of tarot, they think of fortune telling, and that's not what I do. I do a lot more of higher self messages. I love to work more in the present versus the future, because I personally feel like the future is always changing based on what we do in the now. So I love to give empowerment to those that I work with and helping them get through whatever they're going through right now by connecting with their higher self and higher power. So that is what I do, and I have one-on-one sessions and different things I offer as well. But how I got into it, it was not something I was looking for. I've been reading tarot for years, about 20 years now. I started back in high school, and it was more of a fun thing to do. I grew up very Christian, so in my teens, when I realized Christianity just wasn't a good fit anymore, I think I did what a lot of, not everyone who rebels against Christianity, but for me it was like, I want to go to the other side. I want to do what is forbidden. And so tarot was one of the first things that I picked up on, and it was fun and I enjoyed it, but back then it was just entertainment. I didn't see it for the medicine that I see that it is today. And so I've always had a deck on hand throughout the years, and then about 9 years ago, 8 or 9 years ago or so, I was in a situation where I was not sure if I should leave my marriage because it was starting to get abusive. He had his own demons he was fighting, an addiction that I didn't even know about, which was causing erratic tempers and behaviors and things like that. And so I was really torn, should I stay or should I go? And that was the first time I ever turned to my deck for anything substantial other than just, oh, let's just pull this out and play with it. It was the first time I actually turned to it for real help. And I will never forget what actually brought me to the place where I decided to pull out my deck, because it wasn't even something I even thought to do. One morning after he left and he went to work, I was woken up to my dogs, I had two dogs, going crazy at my back patio, which was strange because we were on the second floor apartment. So what were they going crazy at? And so I went to go look out my back patio, and I saw a raven sitting on the edge of my patio, completely unbothered by my dogs. And one of them was a 50-pound Springer Spaniel. Didn't seem bothered at all that the dogs were jumping and clawing at the door. And it just looked at me.
Yeah.
And it just felt so profound and meaningful to the point where I actually Googled, what does it mean when you see a raven? And ravens perfectly correlate with the death card. It's very similar to also the legend of the phoenix. So the being able to be rebirthed after death, changes and things like that, big new beginnings, changes, death of certain chapters, etc. And so that was what prompted me to pull out my deck. And I asked very simply, should I stay or should I go? And I will never forget the answers that came up because it was so relevant. If I stayed, the outcome was the devil card. And the devil means it's not getting better. The devil represents patterns, cycles that are toxic. It represents addiction sometimes. But it typically speaks to you're not going anywhere. You're not getting out of the situation. You're choosing to stay comfortable, even if it's not good for you, versus doing the thing that's scary and taking a leap of faith and making changes in your life. So if I stayed, it wasn't going to get better. If I left, I pulled the death card, which perfectly correlated with seeing the raven that morning. And so, and the death, I know most people hear death and they think, oh my God, you're going to die. No, the death card usually speaks to, actually, I don't really ever read it as death. It always speaks to new beginnings. It speaks to
Mhm.
transitions. Think of like the caterpillar becoming the butterfly, because the butterfly is no longer the caterpillar, so that the caterpillar version of the butterfly is now composted and has, died of sorts. So it's that same idea of closing chapters and opening new ones. And so that was the beginning of my tarot journey, using it as a real tool for help.
Yeah.
And so over the next several years, I turned to my deck for actual decision making. And it was always so on point and so relevant. And there are 78 cards in a deck. And when you can actually pull relevancy over and over and over again, where it actually makes sense, and you actually can see a paper trail with it, it's pretty amazing. And so when 2020 happened, I
Mm.
started asking what's my purpose, and it was through my own spiritual journey.
Out of curiosity,
Mhm.
for 2020, like where were you? What was the situation happening there?
Yeah, so it was actually an interesting situation. I mean, I think all of us were all in interesting situations at the time, but for me, it's a little more unique than normal. While I did split with my ex-husband, he passed away in 2019. And then
Oh,
I
wow.
unfortunately was leaving another abusive relationship at that time. And so my ex's parents took me and my daughter in, and we, had a rental agreement where I rented a room from them. So I was with them, and they didn't want me working during COVID, during the lockdown. So we were all just there. And so at first, that was kind of the first time life slowed down enough for me to start asking, what do I believe in? What do I want to do with my life? And so that just gave me that space for it. And then when I got to into my own place shortly, like maybe mid 2020, I started listening to podcasts. And my therapist at the time started saying something super interesting to me. He started saying this. He started saying, huh, that sounds like a spiritual problem. And he'd say that over and over, like throughout our conversations. I think at that point he was trying to kind of encourage me to, you know, leave the nest, so to speak, because I've been seeing him for
Yeah.
like 5 years. He was there through all of my, probably the worst times of my life. So I was very grateful that I had a therapist to help work me through that. But
Yeah.
he started towards the end, he would always say, huh, that sounds like a spiritual problem. And I didn't know what that meant. So I ended up looking up spiritual podcasts, and because I did a lot of driving for my work. And so I was tired of listening to my music all the time. I wanted something a little different. And the spiritual podcasts were the ones that actually started my healing journey. It started my own, like, connecting with belief systems that actually made sense to me. Because after I left Christianity, I tried different religions and they just didn't fit. I tried Wiccan, I tried Buddhist, we tried different ones, and it just always felt like it didn't fit right. But once I
Mm.
found spirituality as like a whole, like with the whole, and that encompasses everything, that's when it was like, oh, okay, that's why I didn't fit
So
with these other religions. I needed.
what was the difference for you, I guess, or what is the difference to you between like these different, more organized religions and the idea of spirituality? If you could just define that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, I want to preface with, I don't want to harp on anyone's beliefs. If someone
Mhm.
really connects with Wiccan or Christianity or Islam or any of those religions, I don't think that's wrong by any means. I've come to this place where I really believe it's a to each their own. And for me personally, religion, it just feels like it's too much in a box. Versus the spirituality, there's freedom in it. And I kind of feel like spirituality encompasses everything, versus when you actually like are in an organized religion, there's certain beliefs and rituals that go with that, where spirituality just kind of encompasses it all. And I also feel like spirituality is more faith based, because you can be Christian and not have a relationship with your higher power and just do the
Yeah.
rituals and not actually feel like you have the faith. And I think faith is really what we all should be aiming for in whatever belief system we have, because faith is how we actually start to trust in something bigger than us.
Mm.
And like I said, I think it's all one and the same. That's just my own personal belief. So when you're putting faith in Jesus or God, or you're putting faith in universe, it's kind of all the same. And it's just all about, for instance, I love to use this example. My mom is very Christian, an open Christian. So thankfully, she accepts me and loves me, even though she doesn't quite understand what I do. But
Yeah.
she would always get like doors would just open for her all the time. So like we'd be going someplace and we'd be running a little bit late, and she'd always get a closed parking spot in a really busy parking lot. And
Hmm.
every time she'd say, "Oh, I was praying on my way that there's going to be a spot here," so I knew there would be. And that's not very different from manifestation, right? When
Yeah.
you are really, okay, I'm visualizing this is going to be waiting for me, and I believe it. I have faith it's going to work out. Maybe not the way I think it will, but I believe it will somehow. And then it does. So I really believe it's you have to have that belief and faith in something bigger than you, no matter what belief system you actually fall under, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And when you started, because it seems like it kind of came for you from the tarot cards and then from your therapist kind of dropping it into your ears and then like taking it upon yourself to like listen to more like podcasts and everything. Was there an aha moment for you or just a moment where you kind of like were able to accept this modality?
Yes and no. I mean, it was definitely a journey. I had to learn
Mhm.
how to trust it. But I did have a pretty interesting experience very early on with my spiritual journey. So, right after I moved into my own place and I just started listening to spiritual podcasts, one of the podcasts I listened to wasn't very woo woo, which I appreciated because I wasn't ready for that. I needed
Yeah,
that
I know what you
science
mean.
based. Yeah. And so it's called Expanded, and they focused a lot on self hypnosis. And they had workshops where you could do self hypnosis that allowed you to do inner child healing, shadow work healing, things I never heard of before. And I thought, okay, that sounds reasonable. That sounds like it's science based. That sounds like kind of like therapy for yourself. All right, let's give that a try. And so I signed up for the workshop. And so at the time, I was a single parent. I just moved into my own apartment, so now I'm like managing everything. I have a child that's like 5 or 6, and so at the time, when my daughter went to bed, I usually would have a glass of wine. That was just kind of like my routine. It was how I unwinded. It was how I unwinded. And society totally backs that up. They're like, oh, yeah, you're a single parent. Your daughter's asleep, but you took care of her all day and worked all day. Go get that glass of wine. So I
Yeah.
didn't. And my father's an alcoholic. So I'm always very careful with alcohol. But I still had that routine of, okay, I'm gonna have a glass of wine, maybe two on occasion, but usually it was like just one glass. It wasn't a lot. Um, but I was putting groceries away one day, right after I signed up for this workshop, and I knew the only time I would be able to do the workshop would be after my daughter went to bed because I'm not an early bird, so it would have to be in the evening. And I also knew that I couldn't do this work if I had had a drink. Like it's the same reason why years ago I decided I was never going to read tarot, even just for myself, if I had had a drink, because I just knew I wouldn't be clear. And so it's that same thing. If I knew I would probably, I would have to choose not to drink. And so I was putting groceries away one day. I wasn't conscious of this, by the way. It wasn't like I was consciously planning on like when to drink and when to do the workshop. It was just something that I wasn't fully aware of yet because as I was putting groceries away, I heard clear as day. It was like this message just dropped into my head and it said, "If you want to do this work, you can't keep alcohol in the house." And it was really bizarre because I didn't understand it. I was like, "Why?" Like
Yeah.
I don't
You're like, I could
understand.
keep alcohol in this house.
um but I listened. I actually thought,
Yeah.
okay, well, I don't know where that came from, so I'm going to do it. But a couple things happened with that. One, um I try to find some loopholes. Like I try to figure out, well,
Yeah.
if I drink it before it's gone, then it's not in the house. Like, I had to
Yeah.
kind of go through some of those trials and errors with that. But once I actually like obeyed and stopped completely, because if it wasn't there, I didn't have access to it. I started having so much anxiety and panic attacks. And I remember talking to my therapist and I was like, oh my God, am I going through withdrawals? Like, was I addicted to it? And he was like, no, you weren't drinking enough to be physically addicted to it. You're feeling your feelings for the first time.
So like the what you kind of realized was like the alcohol you started using as like a little bit of a crutch. And so that way you could just kind of get through the rest of the day instead of like taking on maybe some of the anxiety and stress that had built up over time. Okay.
Exactly. I was numbing through alcohol, which we all do in different ways, whether it's a substance or our phones or TV. There's different ways that we numb. alcohol was mine at the time. And so that experience really helped me trust in the bigger picture. And
Mhm.
then from there, the more I learned about different podcasts and different modalities. And I think I like the fact that I finally had the freedom to pick which modalities worked for me and
Mhm.
realize that what works for me might not work for you. And that's okay. Like I said, it's all about that faith. And so for me, it was the journey of trusting this message that dropped in my head and then seeing where it took me. And so now I don't drink very much because I don't like the way it makes me feel. I will on occasion, but it just physically it makes it I mean, even it's funny, even after one drink I'm so thirsty because I never knew it
Yeah.
dehydrated you. It so dehydrates you, and if you're not used to drinking, you're like, oh my god, I need water after one drink.
Yeah.
It's just so interesting. And I think it was preparing me though to do tarot, because shortly after that experience, I was asking, well, what's my purpose? I'm hearing all these podcasts about people talking about their purpose. What's mine?
Yeah.
And I kept hearing tarot, and
Mhm.
I kept saying no. I was like, I can't be a tarot reader. No one will take me seriously. This isn't really something that I can support myself with. Like, no.
Mhm.
And it kept coming back. It kept coming back. So I was like dabbling in it. I took a course. I was listening to different podcasts about it, but I wasn't committing. I wasn't saying yes
Yeah.
to it. And then I lost one of my sources of income, without any warning. And in the midst of me trying not to panic, it's kind of going between panicking and trying to like, okay, how is this for me? Somewhere in between that,
Yeah.
I heard clear as day, same, it dropped in my head the same way the alcohol message did. Clear as day, I heard, go work on your business. And I knew exactly what that meant. And once I started reading for people professionally, like I found a piece of myself I didn't know existed. It was the first time I felt like I was actually good at something. It was the first time I felt like I was making a difference in the world and helping other people. And it
Mhm.
just kind of expanded from there.
That's so nice. That sounds very rewarding.
Yeah.
And so for timeline purposes, so was this around like 2021, 2022?
So my spiritual awakening really started like mid 2020, and then I started my business in 2021, in May 2021. So
Oh,
it
okay.
was a good like 8 to 10 month like stretch,
Yeah.
to really kind of go through what the healing that I needed to. And I really think that clearing out the alcohol was helping me get more clear and getting ready to
Yeah.
do more of the channeling, because I do feel like through tarot there is a channeling aspect to it. And so I have to be open to other messages along with the cards. And if I'm not in a good headspace, those messages aren't going to be clear.
What were other things like alcohol is very clear, but what are some other things or some ways where like reality kind of changed for you during this whole process? For so like during that initial year where you kind of realize, okay, like alcohol, I just kind of have to have it out because it's not serving me in the way that I thought it was? And were there other things in your life, like maybe like people or crutches or anything like that, that kind of that you saw in a different light afterwards?
Yes. It was a process, but I think a lot of it really came from when I finally started reading for people, because that's really when how I saw tarot and how I saw the world just began to expand and shift. So when I first started reading for people, it was so funny because I even like before I did it professionally, I just posted on my Facebook page and I was like, I'm thinking about being a tarot reader. Is anyone interested in a free reading? I'm just looking for feedback. And I was really surprised by how well it landed at first. Like people, and these weren't, even though they're on my friends list, they were acquaintances, which is, I
Yeah.
think, was by design that it would be acquaintances that would ask, because I
Yeah.
didn't know anything about their life. I didn't know what they were going through.
Yeah.
And yet, over and over, I was hearing, wow, that's exactly what I needed to hear. This is what I'm going through. This message really resonated. Thank you so much. I even had a couple people that were like, hey, what's your Venmo? I want to send you a couple dollars as a thank you, which shocked me because I was just doing this for feedback.
Oh, that sounds really affirming.
It was, yeah, and that was kind of the first time that I was like, okay, maybe I can do this. But since then, I've really been able to hone on like what tarot really offers, which I don't think I really understood fully before. I knew what it did for me during big life crises and decisions, which it kind of gave me an anchor and a sense of like, okay, so this is what I'm going through and this is what I can expect, which was helpful to kind of navigate
Mhm.
going forward. But working with other people, that's when I realized, oh, I'm not meant to focus on the future. Like that's just not my superpower. And I mean, I know there are many tarot readers and psychics that do focus on the future, and I don't want to
Mhm.
say anything against that either, because I do think that they're picking up on a timeline. I think that they're picking up on the most likely timeline. It doesn't mean it's going to play out, and it doesn't always. In fact, any psychic that says I'm 100% all the time, run. Because
Red flag.
that's the biggest red flag. Yeah, I think most psychics are willing to say that they're like 70 to 80% correct, because there's a lot of filters that happen, and and then there's of course free will, right?
Yeah.
But what I found from doing the work that I do is that the more I was able to connect with the people in their situation, like I don't know you, but yeah, I can tell you like energetically what you're going through, and then tools on how to work through that, like being able to see tarot using being used more in the present and seeing that the confirmation that they needed right now. And so being able to see how that opened. And so I feel like my journey was a lot of, after I dropped the alcohol, my next stage of the journey was learning how to trust myself and learning that this really is making a difference.
Yeah.
And so that was probably the next big like leg of it, which I'm still kind of filtering through, but I've gotten to the point now where I've gotten so much feedback that like I want to say 95% of the time when I read for people, it lands. There's always that small percentage where we just don't connect, and that's totally fine, but most of the people I read for, they take something really meaningful from it. And then there's sometimes really profound situations that I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe that that turned out the way it did,
Yeah.
but it was just learning that, okay, no, there is a gift here. I am helping people. I need to be working now on building my self esteem and my self trust in order to continue to provide the way that I am, just in a better way, because then I won't be second guessing myself so much. So that was
Yeah.
probably the other biggest thing I had to work through and let go.
Oh, nice. Yeah. And with your style of reading tarot cards, so from the way that I'm understanding it, instead of just tapping into a future timeline, you're more so helping seeing people where they're at and able to energetically help them connect themselves to make better decisions that are more aligned with the their higher selves. Is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you summarized that beautifully. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's pretty much it. I mean, I can tap into, so a lot of times when I read, there is usually a future card on the table. And so that's like where you're likely to head as of now, but
Yeah.
I do believe that again, it's all about what we decide to do now is what's going to create our future. And
Yeah.
so that's why for me, I just feel like it's so much more empowering. Like, I feel like in a way it's a disservice to say, oh, this is where you're going to end up, or this is the job, or this is the person, and then just leaving them to wait for it.
Yeah.
And that also determines on free will. Do they make the decisions that line up with what that person told them? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Versus giving them information that they're already going through such and such now. This is actually like real life daily situation.
Yeah.
And then and I like to say invitations, because I'll have people who come to me and they want me to tell them what to do, and I will
Yeah.
not do that because that's not my place. Again, coming back to free will, you have to be accountable for your own decisions too. And
Yeah.
so the invitation is, hey, this is
Which can
what.
be frustrating.
What was that?
Which can be frustrating. Where you're just like, no, like it's awesome that we have free will, but just do it for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I'm very careful with my wording when I do readings. I don't ever say you should do this or you need to do that. Oh,
Yeah.
kitty.
He's very loud. Sorry about
It's
that.
okay. I don't know if you heard mine earlier, but I have kitties too, and one of them likes to yell.
Oh
So
my God.
so even when I read it, I don't ever say you should do this or this is what you need to do. I'll say this is the invitation. This is what you're being encouraged or drawn, and this is the direction you're being drawn into. Like
Yeah.
even when people will come to me, and I get this pretty frequently of these are my options, option A or option B, which one should I do? I'll pull the energies around option A and I'll share it with them, and I'll pull the energies around option B and I'll share it with them. That way
Yeah.
they can look at the energies and then make a discerned decision for themselves. And I mean, it's funny because sometimes it's pretty obvious which one they're being nudged towards,
Yeah.
but even then it's not my place, because maybe they're going to make the opposite decision, and that just means they have more growing and learning to do.
Yeah.
So it's not my place to tell them, oh my gosh, this is the one. If you like, I, had one maybe 3 weeks ago where someone was asking if they should leave a relationship. And if they stayed, it was pretty evident that it wasn't going to get better. It was just, there was no growth. She was outgrowing this person. The other side was, yeah, there was some growth that she would have to do. It wasn't going to be an easy transition by any means, but then there's possibility. And even throughout that reading, I was getting, oh, maybe I'll just talk to him, maybe I'll just work it out with him. And that's okay, because she needs to, it sounds like she needed to experience more of that feeling like she's not growing before she's ready to
Yeah.
make that growing decision. And so, yeah, my job is to present like what you need to know right now. And I've had a lot of people tell me that my readings, it's like I shine a light on the things that they weren't so clear on. So like I'll also have people tell me, "Oh my gosh, that was like a mini therapy session." And I'll say, "No, no, 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 no. That was not therapy. This is more like what you take to therapy. This is more like telling you what you need to work on, and then you take that
Yeah.
to a licensed professional. I'm just the person who's showing you." And I think that could be helpful in the sense that, like, because I've been in therapy and I was in
Mhm.
therapy for about 5 years with the one therapist I was mentioning to you. And that's
Yeah.
a long time to be in therapy. I mean, granted, I was going through a very tumultuous time in my life, but that's a long time to be in therapy. And so sometimes talk therapy, well, as amazing as it is, sometimes you don't know what the thing is. What is it that you need to really work on? What's the root cause or the root trauma?
Yeah.
Sometimes we're not able to get to that just by talking, or it takes a long time to find it. Versus something like tarot could be a faster way to get clearer on what to focus on with your therapist.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that seems like a really good way to use it. I've never even thought of it in that way. That's really cool.
Yeah.
That it can kind of just, yeah, yeah. It's kind of how some people describe certain like medications or me medical plants or just meditations that they've done where it's just kind of like you're able to connect with yourself in a new way so you don't have the same, whether it's, I don't know, whether it's ego or whatever attachment you had going into trying to make this decision or think about something that happened in your life, just to kind of rewire a little bit and take it from a different perspective that you haven't been trying to take it from. And yeah, I found that really helpful in my own ways. And I also think it's really interesting to be able to use tarot and also connect it with other aspects of your life and like other modes of getting that help that you need to make better decisions for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And just like you said beautifully, there's so many different tools and modalities to help us get there.
Yeah,
So, plant medicine is definitely one of the faster ways to kind of connect with your trauma if you do it in a healthy way, an intentional way. There's,
yeah,
oracle cards. There's people who use pendulums. I mean, there's different modalities for sure. And it's all about how can you connect deeper with yourself? Because the more we're connected and rooted in our authenticity and ourself, the easier it is to connect with everyone else.
yeah,
But when we're in our insecurities, that's when there's like this barrier up. So the connection is harder with other people. But yeah, so I've had a lot of people ask me, how does tarot work? And so this is just my take and my experience on it, but I really believe it's all about intention. So the person is showing up with the intention of, I need guidance. I'm showing up with the intention of being the interpreter and the channel. And I 100% believe that we're all energetically connected. And I 100% believe that when I sit down to do a reading, a higher power is showing up for them. Like their higher power, their higher self is what's showing up for them. And I'm literally just the interpreter. And
yeah.
so it's very similar to when you do plant medicine or oracle cards, or you're asking for higher self or higher power to show up for you, and that's the intention, and that's where it all comes from. So I don't think the cards themselves are magical. I don't think the
Yeah,
cards themselves are what's doing it. I think it's the energy and the intention behind it.
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Yeah. Out of curiosity, because it's like you were talking about the kind of connection with yourself that you're making through this process and everything. Have you found now that you're more connected with yourself and you're working in a way and putting it out there in a way that is more connected to your higher self and your passions, that the people who are coming into your life, or maybe some of the people who are in your life, have changed in a way where it kind of reflects more of where you're going versus maybe some of the insecurities that you had beforehand and what that was kind of bringing into your life and attracting through connections.
100%.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of people pleasing tendencies that I've really worked on letting go, and that's been released. The more I've worked on myself and do this work, and the beautiful thing about doing tarot is it is like a deep dive with everyone I talk to,
Mhm.
and so I can't tell you how many times I'm doing a deep dive session, and there are things in there for me that it's not just for them, where I'm going, oh, okay. I need to go reflect on that because I know that that's not just for them. I don't tell them that because it's all about them and their sessions. But there are lots of times where there's lots of taps on the shoulders for me too. Like, hey, pay attention. This isn't just for them.
Yeah,
And so, yes, I've definitely felt like the quality of relationships have really, really changed throughout the years. I mean, even with my current partner, we've been together now over a year, but that was an interesting experience because he's like the healthiest partner I've ever had. I went like 3 years without dating because I really just needed a break. And then when I got into the dating world, oh my goodness, I feel sorry for anyone out there looking. Don't give up, but it's dating apps is not fun.
yeah,
But
I've heard.
um, with my partner, it was very synchronistic. Like things just fell into place that didn't make sense. Like he was a really good friend of my sister's, and my sister and I we're close. We're not like super close, and she sometimes has questionable taste in friends. And so the fact that like one of her friends and I really connected was, so if you had told me that in the past, I would have been like, no. But like I never ran into him before
Yeah,
until like the few months leading up to us connecting, and then there's all these synchronicities. But the biggest thing that I learned was, and it was through my tarot and through working with people, that I was so self-aware that like when you go into a healthy relationship after years of being in unhealthy relationships, it doesn't feel right.
yeah,
It feels like
yeah,
something is wrong. And so there's a lot of I was doing a lot of trauma unpacking with, he was just showing up and being amazing on his end, but for me I had to do a lot of self-reflecting. And so I really feel like I cleared the space for this relationship because I was finally ready to do that inner work, and I had a partner that was supportive and willing to give me the space to do that. So even romantically, it really made space for quality people to come into my life. And so I don't deal with toxicity. I really don't. And when I face it, it doesn't last long. Either we resolve it together and move forward, or I'm just gonna have to
yeah,
move on and distance myself. So that I feel like, tarot is another, even if you were to just do it on your own, because I know there's people who have decks or who've thought about getting decks, like you can 100% do it on your own too. And it's
yeah,
a very self-reflective tool that will help you grow. But you have to be willing to see what the message is, because I think the danger of tarot is sometimes you see what you want to see and not
yeah,
what's really there.
yeah,
And it can get deep. Like the difference between oracle and tarot is oracle's very affirming and very light and very like, and will empower and build you up.
What is Oracle? Like, sorry, is it through the
Oh,
cards as well, or is it, can you explain?
Oracle decks are similar to tarot. Well, they're usually bigger cards though, so I could show you kind of an example.
Oh,
Oracle
cool.
cards tend to be like 44 cards, between 44 and 48 cards, but they're big. And they usually
Oh,
have like messages on them.
okay. Yeah.
And Oracle's beautiful, and I think a lot of people like they'll do like a daily poll to see what they need to know for the day, and it's very, again, very affirming and empowering. Whereas tarot is a system. So tarot, let me just kind of give you a little bit the backstory of tarot, and I'll show you my deck because this is the deck I use most of the time. So if you could see, the cards are very different. They're shaped a little different. They're
Oh my God.
smaller,
Those
but
are so
this one is the,
beautiful.
yeah. So this one is the Empress. But so with oracle cards, you get like different animals or fairies or angels with sayings on them and things like that, and you get like a little booklet that kind of goes into a little deeper. With tarot though, it's a full-on system. So there's major and minor arcana. So the major arcana is 0 through 21. That's where you find cards like the Fool, the Death card, the Devil card, the Lovers, the Sun, the Moon. That's where you find those cards. And then the minor arcana is very similar to a deck of playing cards. So the minor arcana, you have 4 suits. And so you have cups, swords, pentacles, or coins, and then it shows up as coins, and wands. And so you have ace all the way up through. The only difference is with tarot, you have a page, knight, king, and queen. Slightly different, but otherwise it's the exact same. And you have all the 4 suits. And then each suit has a different focus point. So wands is passion, it's fiery, it also aligns with the fire signs in astrology. It's very fiery and passionate and action based. And then you have cups, which is very emotional and connection and getting in touch with yourself and others. And then you have swords, which is all about the mind. It's about the stories we tell ourselves, the narratives that we see, the lens we're looking out of. What is our mind telling us about the situation? Communication, communicating what's in our mind with everyone
Yeah.
else. So that's the swords. And then you have the pentacles, which is it's very earthy. And by the way, the swords was connected with the air for astrology. The pentacles are connected with earth. Pentacles are very like practical, what's going on in the real world, money a lot of the times. So it's very like earthy and tangible. And then and so cups, I don't think I mentioned, is connected to the water sign. And so
Okay.
it's all, each section focuses on something else and specific in our life, along with these heavy cards like the moon and the sun and the lovers, and they all have their own meanings. And so when you read for a tarot, there's different spreads. And so the placement of the cards have a meaning, the cards themselves have a meaning, and then how they all interact together has a meaning. So it's a system, and it tends to really get into what you need to know. It's very detailed. It's very, I like to say, it likes to get in there. It's a little nitty
Yeah.
gritty. Whereas the oracle is beautiful, but it tends to just skim the surface, and you don't always need to use spreads with it. Most you can or you can't, but it's not the system is not the same. It's very different. Whereas tarot is like, this is the system. This is how you
Yeah.
work it.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, thank you for that explanation. And how often do you find yourself using oracle like readings and everything versus tarot readings, or do you have sessions where you use both of them?
That's a great question. I have used both before, although I want to say probably for the last several months, it's mainly tarot. I think the Oracle I usually just use for myself, when I'm wanting that extra confirmation or affirming. Oracle just doesn't speak to me the way tarot does. It's just a very different energy. It's kind of like someone who can work more, because I'm sure there are listeners that you have now, who work beautifully with the Oracle deck, and they're not so connected with the tarot. So I think
Yeah.
it's really just about which one speaks to you. Just like I have a friend who really connects with the pendulum. She said the moment she picked it up, the thing was like flying all over the place. And, even her partner was like, is that normal? The pendulum obviously really speaks to her. So I think it's about finding what it is that you really align with. And for me, tarot is just, it's my tool.
Oh, cool. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And then continuing on your journey, what do you think is on the horizon? Are there specific things that you're now trying to grow towards very actively? And are you using like tarot or oracle or different sorts of things in order to continue down that path?
Yeah, that's a great question. So right now, I mean, I have a pretty good, offering list that I'm pretty content with. I have one-on-one sessions, email readings, and then I just recently launched a new offering a couple months ago called the Alignment Project. And so
Mhm.
this one is just basically taking a tarot reading and making it so much more tangible, because tarot readings are super informative, but they're also very nuanced. And I've always struggled with that in the sense that, like, I wish I could give more. And so the Alignment Project, we do a reading, we do the whole deep dive and everything. And then from there, I create a whole manual of actionable steps that goes with each card, and then together we create like step one, step two, step three on how to get where they're trying to get to, like the goals that they have, and the things they're trying to overcome. And so I create like a whole PDF pamphlet for them. And so that's really cool. And so that's like a new thing that I'm really about. But I think right now, as far as like new on the horizons, I'm working on getting my podcast, more stable and out there. I think I'm on like almost 60 episodes now, and I'm just putting a lot of my energy into that.
Awesome.
And I really think that, I think the next thing for me is going to be figuring out how to teach. So I've been feeling like I need to start doing a course or something. I've been really energetically beginning pushed towards doing more social media. And that part I've been resisting. It's so funny because it's like every time I resist something, I know it's because I'm scared of it, because I know it's something I'm supposed to be doing. So
Yeah, yeah.
I'm feeling that resistance, and I'm working through that right now, because part of being more on social media means, well, it means more content, but for me, I want to be really authentic with my content. So I
Mhm.
think for me that means going live more, and that terrifies me.
Yeah,
So I feel like a lot of what I'm working on right now is how can I help teach what I already know and learned, what I'm still learning, and then how can I, or more of a social media presence, I guess, is what I'm working on now. And so I'm struggling with that a little bit, but like I said, it's one of those things where that resistance, it feels like I'm gonna get there, and it might not be the way I want it to be. Like the last time I was resisting tarot, I lost one of my jobs. So that was what I had to experience for me to finally hear my inner self and be like, okay, I'm gonna do it now. I don't want to get to that point, so I'm trying to just like, okay, I just gotta get past my own fears. But yeah, so social media presence and maybe more teaching.
yeah. Oh, I love that. Yeah, and I've been seeing this quote everywhere now that I've felt attached to it, and it's your new life is going to cost you your old one. And what you just said just really kind of that made me feel it was really relevant in that moment, just because it's like, oh, that like resistance and it's uncomfortable, and like there is some sort of cost with that, whether it's like time, a connection that you have, or getting through a fear that you might have with your voice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, 100%. It's another way to say that is it's basically an ego death, right? Where
Yeah.
you're releasing you're you're releasing the parts of your ego, because I don't think the ego is inherently bad by any means. It has a purpose, but sometimes its purpose is or not that its purpose. Sometimes it takes a little on too much. It's trying to take over instead of just serve its purpose, which is to protect us and all that. So I
Yeah.
think that ego deaths allow more of our higher self to come through and less of our mind chatter to come through. But
Yeah.
you have to let go of the mind chatter and it's hard because we're so used to hearing our mind chatter all the time. And releasing that is not easy. So
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so there's a couple kind of closing questions that I wanted to ask you. The first one is going to be about a reflection upon your journey. So, can you label one thing that you loved about this whole process, one thing that you hated, maybe where you found a lot of resistance, and one thing that was really scary, something you feared?
mhm. So I think one of the things I loved about the process is something I already touched on earlier, is I felt like when I read for someone, I just feel so plugged into the universe, to myself, in ways I've never experienced before. And then also seeing how the messages I share make an impact on the person I'm speaking to. Like that combination is probably the biggest thing that I love. It's very rewarding and fulfilling. And it's just been my favorite part about the journey. A fear, the biggest fear, oh my gosh, was, and still is, but I've worked pretty far on it. But when I first decided to become a tarot reader professionally, I was so scared of the backlash of what would people think, because there's a stigma around tarot, especially for very religious people. Oh, you're a devil worshiper or, whatever, even though obviously I'm not, but you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like that was my biggest fear was what would people think? And especially coming from a religious background, I think I have my own unconscious beliefs that are still there. I'm like slowly getting rid of them. So my biggest fear was really being seen doing what I do, putting myself out there, letting people in my life know what I'm doing, and not shying away from, hey, this is a big part of who I am. Once I just did it, a lot of that fear never even came to pass.
Mhm.
So I always like to recommend, if you're afraid of something, most likely that fear is not going to happen, because that was my experience. I mean, I really was prepared for like people to message me, like friends and family, to be like, what are you doing, and coming after me. Or when I started doing events like markets, like farmers markets and things like that, I was terrified someone was going to throw the Bible at me. Like I was afraid someone was literally going to like attack me for it. They just avoided my booth. you know so
Yeah.
it was like the biggest fear, I think, for me was like being seen and owning what I'm doing. And so I've come to the place now where I'm pretty much like, this is what I do, and I've learned that the backlash really isn't there. But I do still have, like, because of the stigma, I still struggle with that. And especially when I talk to people who, I'm like, oh God, what are they going to think when I tell them I'm a tarot reader? I still have to kind of filter through that mind chatter, right? But it's gotten a lot quieter, which has been nice. It's, so slowly overcoming that. Something I hated. I don't really know if there is something I hated. I mean, there were things that were really uncomfortable.
Mhm.
And I think if I was to say something I hated, it kind of ties in with the fear a little bit, is that there
Okay.
were times where I would get comments on my advertisements that I like had to talk myself into posting on social media. And occasionally
Yeah.
I'd get someone who would say, like, oh, well, the Bible's free, or, you need Jesus, or, this is witchcraft, and so that definitely triggered my fear. And so getting that is probably the only thing I could say that I've hated about the journey. And
Yeah.
even then, though, I have learned how to face it, because
Mhm.
before I try to explain myself and try and, like, you know, I couldn't stand the fact that they thought something that wasn't true. You know what I mean? So I felt like I had to defend myself and explain myself. And that was really exhausting and then fearful. And now I'm kind of at this point where, oh, cool, I have comments on my posts. More people are going to see it now.
Yeah,
And I
yeah. So you're
just,
kind of taking the positive aspect of it.
yeah. And so, I mean, while it was super difficult to go through, I don't even know if I could fully say I hated it. I hated going through it. I'll say that. I hated
The
experiencing it.
moment.
Yes, but I think that it just helped me grow. And so now I'm able to, it's still like, I still kind of get that jarring, like, what are those? But then I just kind of go, oh, well, more exposure, more people are going to see me. So yeah, I would say that's probably the only thing I've hated, but even through that, I've grown from it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And that kind of ties in, I guess, with my next question, which is what's a warning or a word of warning that you'd have for anybody who might be along this journey or along a similar journey?
The biggest thing I can say, I think, is, especially on a healing journey and on a spiritual journey, is really watch the tendency for possible spiritual bypassing. And that's where, kind of similar to what I was doing with the alcohol, but there is a side to spirituality where you could find something like toxic positivity. And let's just put a band aid on this, and everything's fine. And if I just think positively, everything will be positive all the time. And, or that there's something you need to work on, but you're kind of like not, you're just avoiding it because, and this is a lot of shadow work. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with shadow work. So
Mhm.
it's, about healing. It's deep, deep healing of trauma, really.
Yeah.
But sometimes people find the spiritual realm and they just think, oh my God, I just have to be, you know, sunshine and roses all the time. And that's not realistic. And so, like, with what I learned, and I think it's because I started the healing journey before I started reading tarot that I was able to really kind of start that first without feeling like, you know, which helped me understand the tarot and helped me understand helping people more. But I do feel like those on this journey, be careful that you don't avoid the hard part,
Yeah.
because the hard part, and so even in tarot, one of the cards I have is the butterfly card. But before the butterfly card, I have what I like to call the cocoon card, and that's the hanged man card. And so a lot of times I'll see resistance for those that are in the cocoon. There's resistance going into the cocoon where they know there's some serious growth that's going to happen and they're scared, so they don't do it, or they're in it and they're resisting it because they're wanting to be out of it already. And
Yeah.
so when a caterpillar becomes a butterfly, it literally disintegrates into a completely different creature. It disintegrates into a gooey mess and becomes a completely different creature. Like,
Hmm.
we don't see that because that happens inside the cocoon.
Yeah.
From the outside looking in, it doesn't look like a lot is happening. But on
Yeah.
the inside, they're becoming a gooey mess. And so I feel like a lot of times people think becoming the butterfly from the caterpillar is more about how you're looking versus how you're feeling. And so some people skip the important part in the
Yeah.
middle and just kind of go from like where they're at now to what they think they want to be, but they didn't actually do the work to get there. So I would just say that would be my warning is, if you're feeling like you're a gooey mess, you're doing it right. First of all, I like to say that. And, if you feel like there's a lot of resistance around moving forward and you feel like you're not moving at all, usually it's because the movement's supposed to be happening in here and to focus more in here. And then usually things will fall into place, but you can't not do the hard part. I mean,
Yeah.
you can, but then you're not really growing. You're just pretending like you are, and that's not the same thing.
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of like just trying to get the external markers versus doing the actual thing, doing the work.
Exactly. And social media makes that hard because social media, they create it where you want to hit the markers. If you don't hit the markers, then you're doing it wrong, and there's no doing it wrong. In fact, the more authentic you could be with yourself, that comes from the healing, that comes from the hard work. And when you're able to get there, usually that's when the views and things go up because you're now naturally attracting the people who are meant to find you because now you've connected with yourself on that energetic level. But if you don't do that, it's going to feel like you're always a step behind versus don't worry about what everyone else is doing. Do what you need to do for yourself, and doors typically will open on the other side of that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I mean, you kind of just said it beautifully, but my final question, or I guess thing to ask you to give is, do you have an affirmation that you can give to someone who's going through this journey?
Don't wait for the storm to pass, learn how to dance in the rain, which essentially means even when you're going through the hard stuff, even when you're a gooey mess and you're going through it, don't keep yourself back from being in your joy, from finding your joy, from, you know, being in the moment and appreciating everything that's happening. Because sometimes we do kind of want to just write it out.
Yeah.
And then you're also kind of missing what's really unfolding right in front of you, which is you, you
Yeah.
know. And so I think that learning how to dance in the rain allows you just that permission slip to, even when you're going through a hard time, you can still, find yourself in the midst of that. You can still have a good time. And in fact, it's so funny when shadow work comes up in my readings, 9 times out of 10, there's a certain card that comes up with it that talks about being in your play. And as adults, we were like, play what's that? But it's basically being in your joy and doing things that feel good to you. And the reason why that comes up with your shadow work and your trauma work is because that stuff gets heavy.
Yeah.
Going through the trauma, going through the healing, it's heavy. So if we could take a break and just go have a good time and allow ourselves to and not feel like it has to be doom and gloom the whole time, it doesn't have to be. You can go have a good time.
Yeah. You can laugh. It's okay.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's so much easier to come back and pick up where you left off because now you're in a much better space than you were when you left to go there, you know? So I would say learning how to be present and learning how to like really appreciate everything that's happening, even when you're going through the midst of the healing.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I think that was said in such an eloquent and nice way. And this has been so great. Thank you so much for joining, so much for your time. And yeah, everybody make sure to check out the Spirit Journey Collective. What's the best way to find you?
Yeah, thank you. So my website is spiritjourneycollective.com, all spelled out. You can find everything on there from my podcast to my offerings. And then I'm also on social media. I'm on Instagram at spirit underscore journey underscore collective. And that's really where I'm most active. I mean, I do have Facebook, and I think you can get to my Facebook from my website. And I have YouTube, but that's all geared towards my podcast. So that's